Can I request everybody to kindly settle down? We'll start with our second. Ma'am, he's coming. KP? Yeah, ma'am. Welcome back. We will now start with our second and last technical session on India's solidarity with the Global South. I would request our chair, Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, to kindly conduct the proceedings. Just an administrative announcement. We would request all our participating scholars to kindly send in their papers so that we can take out a publication at the end of the conference. Thank you. Sir, all yours.
Thank you, Stuti. I think let me also join the previous chair in congratulating ICWA in organizing this conference. It's great to listen to the young scholars from different parts of the country. I think that's really add more value to this conference. And the idea of bringing young scholars, you know, sometime we in academics also, I'm not old enough, but yes, with age, you develop certain, you know, orthodox ideas, conventional ideas. But by listening to the young scholars with such a forceful, you know, presentations, you need to rethink. I think that's a real asset gain of this conference, and has just been announced publication plan. I think that's another wonderful thing to do. I'm sure all of the young scholars will get number of opportunities to present paper, but this you will always remember, because at this age, such an important platform you're getting is very, very important. Now, I'm supposed to chair a session, and I was enjoying all the discussion that in the session one. The title of the session is India's Solidarity with Global South. And I'm so delighted that the observations or the points that was there in the keynote address was taken into the session one so carefully. And in fact, all the speakers have made their remarks, presentation in and around the theme that has been discussed in the keynote address, including Ambassador Singh made certain remarks on that. So why Global South? And I'll not take more than 2-3 minutes. I think nowadays in IR, a lot of people are discussing about Global South. Is that something new? For a country like India, it was always Global South. You know, it's largely the new kind of a fashion that is coming up. It's mostly from the Western assertion. And why this Western assertion? I think somewhere down the line, there's a cushion of China in the West, in the minds of the West. And that's why, and why China? Because China is somehow, has been said in the keynote address as well, China is asserting. And China, I'm sure you may disagree, but I feel China is a revisionist power. China is a revisionist power, and why? Look at some of the very recent example, the new map. You know, the new map, what was the need for the map? There were controversies, there were issues, but when you bring a map, you assert more. You know, maps are also political. Maps are also not merely symbolic. It has a political message. So they are conveying to the world, not only India, but even to Russia and Southeast Asia, that, you know, things belongs to us. So here is a revisionist power that is trying to change the discourse in the international system for various reasons. I don't want to get into that. And that is why the Global South is becoming so prominent. But for India, the Global South is about continuity. You know, it was always there. The post-colonial India was always talking in terms of non-alignment. We will not go with the Poles, but we'll talk of developing countries and our contribution to forums like UNCTAD. Nobody discuss it so much nowadays. Look at SCO breaks our interventions, and look at G20 presidency. We brought African Union in. That is one of the major contribution, and we told the world that, look, you can't really ignore these relevant, important, growing regions of the world if you're talking of the international forum. We look at the way we are articulating the world is one family, you know, and this is something beyond the polarization. And I'll end my initial observation on a point, and taking a clue from what Ambassador Singh has said. There are issues of idealism and there are hardcore realities. Ideally what a world should be, there should be no poverty. Ideally the world should be discussing about climate change. Ideally the world should be discussing and should arrive on a consensus on a term like terrorism. But what are the hard realities? And I was so, I work on geopolitics, but borders and geopolitics, and I'm so delighted that this term has been so much used nowadays, the geopolitics. But I also, I feel really good that somebody also talked about geoeconomics. I think both the geopolitics and the geoeconomic turn in the world, people have realized that how China has become so rich. I really don't want to get into that story. But, now the geoeconomics question is also relevant, and that is where India's position is very, very important. So, yes, there are idealism in the world politics. As a theoretician, we also talk about that, but there are hardcore realities. And here, I think the question of India's support or India's, idea of global South, I'll say it was a continuity in our foreign policy. It reflects a continuity in India's position. It may be a very fancy term for the global North, like nowadays there's so much of discussion on post-colonialism. And who is defining post-colonialism? Not we, they are trying to define post-colonialism for us. I think this is an appropriate moment, and events like this, where young scholars are discussing about India's, role, I think is very, very important. We should encourage this. And with this, I'll stop, and I would like to listen more to your ideas to really get more, energy from this conference. So I'll call as per the schedule being given to me, and may I request Ms. B. Purnima, who is from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, and she will be speaking on India's technology diplomacy towards Global South, strategies, narratives, and implications. Yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. Very good afternoon to all present here. And without any further delay and hoping that I maintain the reputation of the panel one, let me jump directly into today's this thing. I'm going to give a very brief presentation on India's technology diplomacy towards the Global South, what strategies it has been adapting, the kind of official narrative surrounding India's technology diplomacy towards the Global South, and some takeaways. And firstly, technology is an all-empowering component of today's life, in today's functioning of the globe. And it's a source of comprehensive national power for any state. And that's how it has also helped India in its rise in the power ladder. And so technology diplomacy is the use of technology as a tool of diplomacy to achieve India's foreign policy agendas. And so far, India has been using it in a very effective way, especially towards the Global South. It has helped India strengthen international partnerships and also have a say in shaping the global norms and standards for the development and use of technology. Through years, India has been a very active participant in multilateral forums, especially during the times of SSODs, the Special Session on Disarmament, in influencing the kind of agreements that come with respect to nuclear weapon use and any other evolving technology. India has been an active participant. And technology diplomacy has been a very core component of India's foreign policy. India has been using this in two ways. Firstly, diplomacy for technology, for sharing technology, as well as learning from the global lessons, learning new technologies, new ways of adopting technologies, as well as technology for its diplomatic conduct. Now, why technology diplomacy towards global south is very important. Like I said, India has been since its independence and through the ages a very strong advocate of the voice of the global south being heard and taken seriously. And through this technology diplomacy, India has been able to support the development of the global south by sharing its expertise as well as its resources. More so, it has helped India enhance its global influence by promoting its technological leadership and values. This is a very prominent stage for India, prominent opportunity for India to promote its stance with respect to technology and technology development and helping helping other states of the global south. Next is building relationship with key partners and also addressing common challenges like cyber threats or even climate change. India has been very active in partnering with the states of the global south with respect to developing clean energy and helping them adapt to the new kind of challenges that come as a result of climate change, like the unprecedented disasters and disaster preparedness as well as management. And finally, in this current century, digital economy plays a very important role in economic development, and India's technology diplomacy has helped building many important aspects that regarding digital economy, like digital infrastructure, development of digital skills in these countries, thereby attracting investments also, as well as creating jobs, which are very important for the development and progress of these countries as well. For example, the UPI has been adopted by many of these developing countries like Malaysia, UAE and Bhutan, and this is a very important step in the sense that it helps the promotion of India's trade and commerce, the prospects of it with these countries, and that is a positive step ahead. Now, India has several advantages to leverage its technology diplomacy towards the global south. Firstly, it has a very large and growing domestic market for technology products and services, especially with the government promoting Atmanirbharta and made in India and such homegrown initiatives, homegrown products. There is a good avenue for India to swerve through. And secondly, India's favorable demography as well as a strong talent pool that can help share knowledge as well as resources with the countries of the global south. Thirdly, the growing number of successful tech startups within India as well as in other developing states as well. I mean, G20, this summit, India has leveraged it through its G20 Digital Innovation Alliance, where startups and their technological developments were identified and implemented and shared with the rest of the, not only the G20 members, but also the non-G20 members. So basically, the principle is that the sharing of ideas would eventually help bridging the technology divide between the global north and the global south. And finally, India's sustaining commitment to inclusive and sustainable development, and also India being capable of giving affordable and accessible resources and knowledge to these countries. So through the next rest of the presentation, we are going to look into what are the strategies and the key focus areas of India's technology diplomacy towards the global south, as well as the prevailing narratives surrounding India's use of technology, official narratives in India. Firstly, the strategies. India primarily has used two major routes, that is the bilateral as well as the multilateral route. The bilateral route has allowed India to work on a one-on-one basis, provide tailor-made solutions to the specific needs of the countries. Some of the examples being the agreement with Bangladesh for a cross-border digital payment service. Now, this allows Bangladeshis to pay or even receive money from India, and therefore enabling the promotion of trade between the two countries. And also India has a cybersecurity agreement that involves knowledge sharing of best practices as well as joint exercises, as well as with Nepal with a digital land registry system that has prospects of reducing issues like corruption and bribery with respect to land registry system processes, and also another similar IT cooperation agreements and other agreements with the rest of the global south. Apart from that, India also has used a lot of multilateral forums in order to propose its initiatives of technology diplomacy. And multilateral forums are advantageous in the sense you can reach a wide range of audience and also propose initiatives that benefit much of the developing countries. One of the example is Pan-African E-Network, which seeks to, wherein India seeks to connect all African states with high-speed internet, broadband internet services. Also, the International Solar Alliance. Now, this has put India in the map, has made a very admired actor in the global arena as a torchbearer in climate action. And India has proposed, or this was a brainchild of India, and now it's serving as a platform for these developing states to come together and share their common concerns and priorities and what can be done about it. And especially bringing women in the forefront as a participant in creating sustainable energy is a very important aspect of this alliance, and much credit goes to India. Apart from that, India also participates actively in organizations to bring forward its technology diplomacy, especially in organizations like UNESCO, BRICS, ITU, and very recently G20. Which we'll see in some time. Apart from that, the major focus areas for India's technology diplomacy has been creating infrastructure, digital infrastructure in these countries. For example, the India Stack, it is a digital public infrastructure, Aadhaar, ICWA, everything is part of India Stack. And many of these developing global South countries have come forward to adopt India Stack into their own countries, and some of these are Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Bhutan, and Colombia as well. Apart from that, India focuses on skill development, technical skill development, and the top of the head example is the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, where India provides a wide range of skill development courses, including rural development and then agriculture, entrepreneurship, even courses like strategic and security affairs, as well as defense mechanisms and engineering. And next is entrepreneurship. India has helped a lot of these countries by developing their online digital entrepreneurship resources. And governance is another area of focus for India's technology diplomacy, where India has helped in the digital identity and digital governance in these countries. And finally, the security aspect. Of late, India has been promoting for the responsible use of AI. It has also offered to train about 3 million participants in AI and the development in AI and how to manage its evolution, as well as other cybersecurity cooperation, as mentioned before. Now, quickly jumping into the narratives, there are some major narratives that have been propagated, that have been mobilized by the Indian government and the officials of the Indian government. Some of them being India is a reliable partner for developing countries on technological issues. India has time and again focused on words like digital inclusion and responsible use of technology, as well as importantly self-reliance and sustainable development, making it project itself as a reliable partner for the developing countries. It has always tried differentiating itself from other major powers, and such narratives have helped India in a larger way. As we know, the recent UNGA speech by the External Affairs Minister, he said PM Modi summed up the core focus of the country today in 2 words: technology and tradition. He was right about it, and it is the way to project India has upholding its tradition as well as going forward in the pursuit of adopting to the evolving technology and the technology advances, as well as sharing the same. The next narrative being giving voice to the global South. This has been going on for years, but more prominently the voice of the global South that was mentioned by our ma'am in the first session, how it was it was a prelude to G20, how India gave opportunity to the global South to pitch their opinion, which can be later taken into the G20, and which went in under the motto of unity of voice and unity of purpose. Another big feat was the inclusion of AU as a permanent member in the G20, which again is was possible under India's presidency. Following PM Modi also said our G20 priorities will be shaped in consultation with not just our G20 partners, but also our fellow travelers in the global South, whose voice often goes unheard. So the underlying tone of the G20 was always with respect to the global south, how their voice must be heard and how they should also be made as part of the decision making process. The next narrative is India is a champion of South-South cooperation on technology issues. It's promoting India's importance as a rising power as well as its focus on South-South cooperation. Time and again, our government has emphasized on India's role in solving human problems, and India can play a key role in shaping the technology and digitalization of the world, as well as they have promised to for cross-border data flow, not just developing it at home, but also sharing it abroad, especially to the global south. And finally, tracking back there's been trend of tracking back to history for promotion of indigenous and civilizational knowledge. And as part of G20, India also organized the Bharat Mother of Democracy, a tech-based exhibition where history from Rigveda, Ram Raja were all exhibited to demonstrate that India has, by tradition, been involving everybody in its decision-making process, and it's a democracy. Only to demonstrate or tell the world or give a signal that even G20, the global south, and everybody in the global community will take into advice. Finally, these narratives have not just been completely restricted to the official circles of the Indian government, but with this G20, even the private entities, civil society, both in social media and mainstream media, and even common men have been able to drive these narratives very successfully, helping in a construction of India's image as a very responsible and benevolent power. So India's support to Global South is being increasingly recognized, as we see recently the Mauritian Prime Minister said that it's not a country that says bye-bye. It is not a representative of a Global South. Rather, India takes the rest of the Global South to the table along with it. So that says a lot about India's, at least the impression that India has made in some of these global south countries. And secondly, technology diplomacy has been turning out to be mutually beneficial. India hasn't just helped the other countries, but it has helped itself by the concept of self-enlightenment. It has also enhanced India's global standing as a team player and a responsible power. And finally, India has been able to build global South solidarity through technology diplomacy, through addressing shared challenges, building mutual trust, promoting equitable development, and building a sense of collective progress and responsibility. This said, it doesn't mean that there are no challenges. There are challenges in terms of economic constraints, political dissimilarities, especially what we see brewing in Maldives right now with the new presidency, and other domestic issues, which Dr. Raja Mohan had said, balancing between the international aspirations and domestic constraints, and also matching aspirations with capabilities. These are some things, if worked through, India's technology diplomacy will definitely fructify and give its proper dividend. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. I think I'll keep the comments for the last. May I now request Sayantan Haldar, who is from South Asian University, from my university. And I know I'm aware of his work, and he will be speaking on Global South cooperation in the multipolar Indian Ocean, examining India's role in IORA.
Thank you to the chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a work in progress, and the paper that I'm going to present today is a slightly modified version of the abstract that I had submitted, and which I have revised subsequently after receiving some suggestions from ICWA. So thanks for that. And so at the outset, I think I want to state that the purpose of this paper is to look for some normative pointers which can be instrumental for us in understanding how India can engage with IORA on lines of Global South cooperation. And keeping this in mind, the title of my paper is Global South Cooperation in a Multipolar Indian Ocean, Examining India's Role in IORA. So starting from the broader question of multipolarity in the global order, and I think a lot of speakers have emphasized this today, and this has been reiterated time and again. multipolarity has, in fact, actually increasingly characterized the global order, marking an end to the Cold War and post-Cold War geopolitics, which were of bipolarity and unipolarity, respectively. Now, what are the variables which are instrumental in the construction of the emerging multipolar order? So, a few variables which can be identified are the rise of China and emerging India, changing political dynamics in Europe, shifting role of Japan, Australia, ASEAN. So in a sense, the middle powers as we knew it are sort of occupying a more prominent space in how the global political discourse is shifting. Of course, there is the factor of Africa. Now, in this context, I think it is also important for us to note that oceans are global spaces. Now, as a global space, geopolitics in the oceans too have witnessed an emerging multipolarity. So whatever happens in the global political order will have some reflection on other sort of global spaces which can be seen as subsets of the broader global political order. Now, since I'm working on the Indian Ocean, this merits the question, what does the contemporary Indian Ocean geopolitical landscape look like? Now, before going into that, I think it's important to provide some historical context. Indian Ocean for a very long time, and I'm borrowing words of Christian Bouchard, who said that Indian Ocean was considered as a neglected ocean, and it was hardly perceived as strategically relevant. Now, this was mainly because as a politically fragmented region, there was no common threat that anchored geopolitics of the region as a whole. But I think increasingly, and especially after the turn to the 21st century, with the economic rise of India and China and the Indian Ocean assumed greater salience, which of course enhanced the strategic relevance of the region. Now, if we go back to the maritime security challenges that emerged in the Indian Ocean, I think one of the first big challenges that emerged in contemporary times was the threat of piracy near the coast of Somalia, which propelled Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean, which was, of course, encouraged and supported by the US. And this, in a sense, marked the beginning of Beijing's growing naval footprint in the Indian Ocean. Now, this, of course, prompted a shift in India and US's approach towards the Indian Ocean, which primarily manifested by way of US's gradual economic disengagement with China, and also a sense of security dilemma that crept into India's strategic calculus, and how it began to see the threat posed by China at sea. Now, what happened as a result of this is that Indian Ocean geopolitics began to be seen primarily through the means of, or through the prism of great power competition between India, China, and US. Now, the three primary axes in the region, of course, are important, but there are other approaches which are equally important for us to understand, and other voices or other narratives which provide a more holistic approach to understanding Indian Ocean geopolitics. And here I have quoted the work of Derek McDougall and Pradeep Taneja, who of course write in a very different context by trying to look at how Indian Ocean geopolitics has evolved by taking into consideration the strategic agency of island countries. But I think the kind of rationale they provide for such an analysis is very important, particularly for this paper. Now, I think another work which is very important is the one by Frederick Gare and Jean-Luc Saman, who posit that a new Indian Ocean has emerged where the great power contest is compounded by simultaneous strategies of local players. Now, how is this happening? Increasingly, new players which were previously marginalized in the conceptualization of the Indian Ocean have assumed greater centrality, and here I think examples of African littoral states, ASEAN countries which are Indian Ocean littoral countries, or even the Gulf littoral states. I think increasingly we are seeing a lot of literature and a lot of policy outlook coming from these regions, leveraging their sort of presence in the Indian Ocean. So therefore, I think an emerging multipolarity is the main characteristic of the new Indian Ocean as we know it now, demonstrating a complex dynamic of both great power contest and growing participation from the local players as critical stakeholders. Now we turn to ICWA and Indian Ocean geopolitics. Now, to provide some historical context to ICWA, it was of course mooted in 1997 as we know it, and ICWA, I think it is important to note this, that ICWA is the only pan-Indian Ocean regional intergovernmental organization. With 23 full members, it has increasingly symbolized the Indian Ocean identity, and I think the element of identity again is very important here, because even though there are competing regional or sub-regional organizations present in the Indian Ocean, I think the basis of their presence in Indian Ocean, sort of enabling them to come together and form an organization is very important. Now, of course, there are other countries which are Indian Ocean littoral countries, but due to a combination of various factors, have not been able to get membership of ICWA. Now, I think again, the structure of IORA as an intergovernmental organization positions it as a norm setter of the region. The Council of Ministers, which meets once yearly, provides it with an opportunity to review and work towards collective cooperation in the Indian Ocean, which of course is very important. Now, the composition of IORA includes a significant presence of Global South involving littoral states from Asia, Africa, as well as Australia. And in the context of Global South, I think Asian and African littoral states are very important. We have a lot of countries from Africa who have severe economic challenges. Of course, in the context of Asia as well as Africa, there are small island states which have their own sets of challenges. Now, the Global South presence in IORA is particularly critical. Now, why am I saying that? Now, I essentially argue that there is a double burden on these Global South countries in the Indian Ocean region, and that is one, of course, the economic challenges which they are sort of dealing with, but also maritime security challenges. So I think a way to look at Global South presence in Global South presence in the Indian Ocean is that not only are these countries facing economic challenges, but also have additional maritime security challenges. So therefore, a landlocked Global South country is not necessarily similar to how a littoral Global South country perceives its strategic thinking. Now, here the role and efficiency of IORA continues to remain under considerable scrutiny. There has been a lot of writing on to what degree or to what level IORA has been able to achieve the objectives that it has set out for itself. However, I think the scope of IORA in mitigating key challenges needs to be underscored because, as I said before, it is the only regional organization in the Indian Ocean which sort of encapsulates all the countries which are there in the Indian Ocean region. So therefore, the potential to work towards collective cooperation in IORA is there, which is probably not there in other sub-regional organizations which are focused on more narrow scopes. Now, the nature of the location of IORA member states necessitates a maritime view of the key challenges of their core interests. So therefore, to sort of map their core interests and core challenges, I think a maritime view is particularly critical. Now, the challenges faced by Global South countries remain pluralistic in nature. Again, as I said, the challenges of a potential landlocked Global South country is different from that which has stakes in the Indian Ocean, and the kind of maritime security threats that it faces in the in the maritime domain is also very important. Now, cooperation in the domain of maritime security and blue economy are critical for the Indian Ocean littoral Global South. So if we can sort of conceptualize these states as Indian Ocean littoral Global Souths, and I think to add to the complexity of the challenges and the interests that they have in the region, I think that would be very useful. And of course, in this context, IORA's role is sort of pivotal. Now, coming to India Global South cooperation and IORA, of course, I think India is seeking to lead reforms in the global order to be the voice of the Global South. Global South cooperation, of course, was also a key cornerstone of the recently concluded G20 summit, and I think it is a stated objective of India's foreign policy to sort of channelize the voice of the Global South. And if we sort of juxtapose this position of India towards the Global South, and then sort of see it in relation to how, in relation to its presence in the Indian Ocean, its role as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean, the strategic framework of Sagar, for example, which continues to guide India's foreign and naval policy in the Indian Ocean, I think we can see a great degree of convergence here. And India's location in the Indian Ocean accords primacy in the IORA framework as a major stakeholder. Of course, the geographical location of India is very important. And, I think this also sort of brings us to a historical account of India's role in IORA. In fact, during India's chairship in between 2011 to 2013, IORA did make a lot of headway in terms of identification of 6 priority areas and 2 focus areas, which still continue to govern the way IORA is working. And so these are the broad priority areas and the focus areas which govern IORA. Now, I think an important question here is how can India facilitate Global South cooperation in IORA? Now, for that, I think a normative clarity of a maritime view of Global South is very important. So therefore, how we can think about it is not just to approach, not just to have a vertical approach of looking at Global South by way of economic determinants, but also a more horizontal approach by way of, focusing on their cartographic or geographic locations. And this will enable us in conceptualizing the intersectionalities and the challenges and interests of the Indian Ocean littoral Global South. And of course, a few areas which are very pertinent to India facilitating Global South cooperation in the IORA our cooperation in the domains of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, blue economy, digital infrastructure, of course, with the Information Fusion Center. I think India has made a head start, but I think it doesn't work with all IORA members as yet. So I think some degree of convergence on that front would also be very helpful. And in a sense, sort of, if we look at maritime security challenges as a broad framework, including human security, energy security, food security, for example, I think that would be very helpful. So I think I will end here.
I think a very important topic, IORA. Not a lot has been discussed on this organization, but it is a very important organization. And when we should also remember the role of late Nelson Mandela, in the Indian Ocean region, in Indian Ocean regionalism. Now from here, I think a very important title that Prashant Kaushik is going to present, and he is going to speak on India, China, and Global South, a comparative analysis. And Prashant is from Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. Over to you, Prashant.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody, and my regards to Dr. Banerjee, Ambassador Singh, and thanks to ICWA for organizing this wonderful conference. I'm going to talk about the topic. Basically, the argument has three dimensions. The multipolar world, a lot has been already said. So the question is, are we there yet? And looking at the current international order and the global south there. And of course, voicing the global south, where does India and China stand in that? As already been pointed out, it's a world of contestations. So where does the two stand in that contest? So, well, as a pole, the definition which is available there, a country is required economic power, military might, and other forms of influence to be a pole of its own. And a multipolar world is a world where there are multiple centers of power and influence rather than one dominant superpower or bipolar rivalry, as the case has been during the Cold War and the post-Cold War era. The economic size, military might, and global leverage, if that is to be taken as the definition of a pole, then we can say that it's the United States, of course, and increasingly China fitting into that definition. Of course, there are several rising middle powers and non-aligned countries with large populations and growing economies, but do they really constitute a pole yet? That's a question which has been coming again and again. It will keep coming up for maybe next few years. This map or this diagram also illustrates the point, actually. The two countries, US and China, are accounting for half of the world's total defense spending, and their GDP roughly equals the 33 next largest economies added together. Of course, the US is the largest military and economic power. And according to Chinese scholars, China is the only country which is closing that gap with the US. Of course, it can be questioned further. The problems with the international order, the current international order has already been pointed out, and where does the current international order stands with the global south? Of course, the international order is facing the problems of legitimacy, equity, and complacency, among others. It's a like almost 80 years old order established in the wake of the Second World War. Can we still govern the world with the 80-year-old international order, that structure? That's the question which is coming up. Whether the rules which have been laid back then been observed by the advocates of the international order, US, that's a question. Whether the international order has served the interests of the majority of the world, a global south being left out, that's another question. And of course, the sheer longevity of this international order has also led to a lot of complacency that this is a wonderful system which has served so well. Perhaps the challenges have been there, but here and there little reform has served the purpose, and the order has been quite like long living. So these are the questions which but then these are the problems which lay at the core of the international order. Of course, these we find being aggravated in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and the repercussions of ongoing conflicts, tensions, and disputes. Ukraine is one. India-China is another. China's expansion and policies in South China Sea. There are several more. And of course, there are changes in the distribution of global economic and political power. This is something which is there. World Bank has called it the shift of economic power there from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, as we may call it. There is no doubt that the international order need reform, and of course, primarily to improve global cooperation, because there is a need to become more representative actually now, because as we have discussed from the number of countries who were there as the founding members of the UN till now, like how like more than 100 countries have joined UN, but then the grouping remains selective. So this is amply reflected when the Indian External Affairs Minister says that the days when a few nations set the agenda and expected others to fall in the line are over. Thus, a multipolar world is more than desirable. And where does the Global South comes in the gamut actually? Of course, the Global South is not a geographical term, as my fellow panelist has already pointed out. Well, it denotes a mix of political, geopolitical, and economic commonalities which are there between nations. And of course, once again, as the Indian External Affairs Minister has pointed out, it's a feeling. Those who have it, they know it. Those who doesn't have it, they also know it. And since the turn of the 21st century, as I mentioned already, this shift in wealth is taking place. What are the priorities of the Global South? Of course, it is more of sustainable living, ecological balance, inclusive and sustainable growth, universal health care, access to quality education, technology has been pointed out already. The need to improve the Human Development Index, of course, to raise the capacities and the capacity building, deal with the climate change. When UN was established, climate change was not such a major problem, which is today actually. The need to access COVID vaccines. Our vaccine Metri is a classic example. Despite the problems and the domestic challenges which we had, it was quite a successful initiative. Climate justice also. A lot of countries which are facing the negative effects of climate change are not the countries who have actually contributed to the greenhouse gases emission over last, say, 100 years or so. The non-industrialized countries, basically, but they are at the receiving end of the climate change happening, the increasing sea levels. Indonesia, for example, you can see like, and the Global South is telling unequivocally to the global North. President Widodo, Indonesia, so he told quite clearly that that the Global South do not want a return to the old Cold War power bipolar structure and that mentality, the zero-sum game mentality. And the urgency is to manage economic recovery and bring sustainability in the post-pandemic era, and not some sort of a power politics which is there. How does India and China do while voicing the Global South? At the outset, the caveat being, like Indian leadership has also time and again said that we don't seek the leadership of Global South. Actually, we are part of Global South and we want to be the voice of Global South. In other words, India is not really saying that India is the Vishwaguru, has all the solutions. But yes, India is a Vishwamitra, which has already been mentioned. Of course, as Jaishankar has mentioned it in the UN speech also. A friend to the world, of course. So there are several variables, and how does India and China do on those variables? These are just pointers, actually. It can be further expanded, the argument. Acceptability and the trust, actually. India is a democracy, of course. It is predictable. Everybody knows that next elections are going to take place in India. India comes to the table more as an interlocutor, as a Vishwamitra. Of course, while we face a challenging situation at the northern borders with China, of course, we can sit with them in SCO and with BRICS. Of course, we can sit together with Americans in Quad and I2U2, and there could be many more. China is a party state, which is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Xi Jinping's contribution in making Japan, a pacifist Japan, in a militarist has already been highlighted in the morning. There are writings in Chinese which are doubting the idea of Global South and calling it a US ploy, and making a clique. These writings are there recently, particularly at the time when India was organizing the Voice of Global South online summit. There are debt issues, of course, with BRI projects and others, and of course there are territorial conflicts with neighbors, be it the land border with India, be it in South China Sea. Relation with the global north. India is not having an adversarial relationship with the West, with the global north. We can be quite sure about it. Whereas China is being increasingly seen as a challenger. The relationship with the West is increasingly fraught. It is also the contestation is also an ideational contestation. How do we do when we talk about, when we ideate about new initiatives and ideas? I think as far as International Solar Alliance, it has already been highlighted. The cornerstone of Samvad is reflected there. India and France came together to launch the International Solar Alliance. And that is the key. Whereas BRI, if we compare, actually BRI is an initiative which a leader goes and announces there, and then like everybody is expected to toe the line, perhaps. India didn't join BRI, whereas India joined, was quite positive about the the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, because India was consulted on that, but on BRI, those consultations perhaps were missing. In stark contrast is the International Solar Alliance, which is actually a product of Samvad or a dialogue or discussion, like India and France came together, and then of course, like other members are joining it. Of course, life or the mission lifestyle for environment, like the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, does it compare with community of common destiny? But China seems perturbed when India is talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. There were voices that they should not be included in the G20 declaration and so on and so forth. Of course, India played a key role in voicing the Global South in January by organizing the online conference, then in June proposing the inclusion of African Union and inviting the African Union to the table, and of course making actually G20 more of G200. China, on the other hand, is seen proposing a sort of G2 with USA. That is there. Soft power, a lot has been discussed, what India has to offer. Currently, it could be one of the things. Actually, there are more than 200 Indian origin people occupy leadership positions in 15 odd countries, and over 60 of them are holding cabinet positions. International Yoga Day is also a classic example of soft power projection. On the other hand, we have this just a comparison. The Chinese proficiency competition is a global competition organized by the Ministry of Education China every year. It's in its 22nd edition this year. China ends up spending a lot of money. The exact estimate is not available, but then a lot of money is spent in organizing country-specific competitions, and then choosing selecting the winner, and then sending them to China and organizing like a huge TV show around this event, and then they end up spending a lot of money for that. On the other hand, we have International Yoga Day. I think it started in 2015, 7-8 years old, but then it brings up, it combines various elements of soft power together. In the conclusion, of course, the international order needs reform to reflect the requirements of Global South. There could not be any second thought about that. There is an opportunity for the Global South to lead the agenda now, with G20 being the case, the presidency going to India from Indonesia, and then slated to be offered to Brazil and South Africa next. So there is, of course, the Indonesia and India have set the ball rolling for the Global South, and going ahead, there needs to be a lot of pragmatism, patience, diplomatic ingenuity, and hard work. And China is going to remain there. We can't change our neighbors, of course. We do have some strengths. Let's work on them. Thank you.
Kiran, who is the last speaker for this session, but he is speaking on a very important topic of mapping India's capacity building measures in Global South, a case for maritime diplomacy. Kiran is from Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati.
Thank you,
Over to
Chair.
you, Kiran. Yes.
Very good afternoon to all. The topic of my presentation is mapping India's capacity building measures in the Global South, a case for maritime diplomacy. So, against the backdrop of India, Indo-Pacific emerging as the global point, the global focus of the global politics, I'd be looking at India's capacity building, India's maritime diplomacy towards the Global South and its effect on its the capacity building measures. So, maritime insecurity is intensifying. Over the last 2 decades, the rise in frequency and magnitude of the non-traditional security threats in the marine space have significantly altered the region's security and dynamics, and which has also become a major concern for the international community, especially for the Global South. And against this backdrop, India has assumed a prominent role in this transnational responses, which included a mix of cooperation, risk, and responsibility sharing. As such, these joint partnerships and initiatives with the Global South countries have consistently been part of its wider efforts in the Indo-Pacific. So, looking into, the Indo-Pacific is characterized by the strategic competition of the great power rivalry. We have seen the U.S., China, and even the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has actually diverted the attention from the perceived issues and concerns of the Global South countries. Not only being marginalized by the globalization and the capitalism efforts, the Global South countries have also need to put up with the negative consequences of the non-traditional security threats in the maritime domain. Like this include the climate change, the natural disasters, overfishing, and depletion of fishing stocks are some of the piracy, drug trafficking, and these are some of the issues which actually disproportionately impacts the Global South countries. And there has been a visible failure of the global order and the Western-led institutions in addressing some of these issues. And much of the focus of the countries has been to gain competition has been for the gaining influence with the Global South countries. And against the Indo-Pacific gaining currency and getting increased attention in the global politics, the Global South countries actually expect their primary interest in the maritime domain to be taken up and address the issues and concerns. And one of the major mistrusts of the Global South countries has been the inconsistent engagement of the regional and the global powers, and somehow not matching the rhetoric with their commitments. And what makes India as an Indo-Pacific power, which actually could look into some of the leadership positions of the global South countries? India's geopolitical status and positionality, which it has maritime partnerships, maritime initiatives, and which played a vital role in the maritime governance in the Indo-Pacific. And over the last 2 to 3 decades, there has been an unprecedented shifts in the geopolitical configurations of and preferences of India. We have seen from non-alignment movement and then more focus on the land borders and military isolationism. From this, India has risen to over the last 2 decades, there has been a significant naval dynamism which is exhibited. And among its military partnership, it is the maritime partnership and initiatives which found more prominence. And also, it has been an active player in regional multilateral forums and initiatives like the Indian Ocean National Symposium, and like it has been mentioned, the International Solar Alliance and the CDRI. And it has been consistent in highlighting the global South challenges. India has been, like we have seen the recent African Union inclusion in the G20, and the SAGAR, the IPOA, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative. Well, there has been some criticism and doubts. How effective this actually could be, but unquestionably, it has brought the global South countries' importance and preferences and perspectives and challenges into the discussions of the Western and the global arena. And one of the reasons why it has actually been India, the credibility and recognition which actually comes from India's rise as a economic powerhouse, and the resilient and the indigenous navy which it possesses actually gives credibility to its military potential in the Indo-Pacific. And also the lack of a uniform geopolitical and geographical conception for the other countries like the US, Australia, who have a very skewed and narrow conception of what Indo-Pacific is. India actually has a much wider conception of what Indo-Pacific is. So this makes the structural interventions much more easier to tackle. And what makes the global South countries, I mean, to look at India? I mean, like I mentioned, I mean, with the major powers actually engaged in the great power competition, the most of the majority of the focus of the global South countries has been to partner with the middle powers to address substantive maritime issues in the non-traditional security threats. And just not the power status, any country to be successful in addressing global South challenges need to have a kind of a legitimacy. So India carries that legitimacy with its kind of various maritime initiatives and partnerships. And also India's rising status on the global stage. I mean, its relationship with the US and its balancing relationship with the Russia. It's foraying into the South Pacific islands, and it is also developing relations with the Gulf. And it is also developing maritime partnerships with the Southeast Asian nations. We could see India could actually act as a bridge between the south and the north, or the east or the west, whatever you call. So India could actually, the rising status of India could actually be a significant role in how the global South countries look at it. Also, the global South interests are closely linked with the rise of India as a significant power. This can also be seen in how the president of the new Papua Guinea actually asked India to take a leadership position in the international institutions to lead the lead the global South countries' interest. And another point, I mean, the constructive engagement with India engages with the non-traditional security threats, which has been more on cooperative and consultations lines rather than the coercive approaches which generally the Beijing or the China which usually undertakes, the BRI or the diplomacy which you usually see. So this takes us, I mean, to the maritime diplomacy, like what India actually does in addressing the maritime diplomacy and non-traditional security threats. So India acknowledges the political and operational realities and it uses maritime, and it acknowledges the gaps in addressing these common challenges, and it uses maritime diplomacy to address some of these common challenges in the maritime domain. Like maritime diplomacy can be like defined as encompasses a spectrum of activities from cooperative measures such as port visits, exercises, and humanitarian assistance. And it has also been part of various multilateral forums which actually promote maritime governance and good order at sea. And one of the major features of India's initiative is, I mean, non-traditional security is actually taking an importance in in these institutions and working for greater synergy. And there has been not overt focus on pursuing geopolitical interests, but more to seek greater synergy between them. And also there is a specific signaling whenever India talks about or its actions signal its own limitations. Like we have seen how from the net security provider it actually came back to preferred security partner. It actually ties up the rise in the minilaterals. India has been successful in signaling its own limitations. So I'll just brush up with India's maritime capacity building activities in the global South. Like India's maritime aspirations have been closely intertwined with the security of the global South countries, especially in its neighborhood. The lack of an overarching regional security architecture, the failures of the SAARC, and the regional forums like IRO, INS, and the Colombo Security Conclave, the BIMSTEC, underline some of the keenness of the global South countries to tackle the security challenges. Also, India's maritime capacity building with the global South countries, I mean, they oscillate between being patchy to most comprehensive. In the global South, with Pakistan, for obvious reasons, we don't develop comprehensive maritime relations. And with Bangladesh, we do have the boundary issue, and the porous boundaries actually escalate the maritime threats between in the border areas. But with Sri Lanka and Maldives, we have a comprehensive range of arrangements like the Sri Lanka India naval exercise, the Police Chiefs dialogue, which looks into the policing in the Pak Strait between the maritime space India and Sri Lanka, the Gale dialogue, which the Sri Lanka organizes, and the Colombo Security Conclave, and the trilateral Coast Guard exercises between India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. So, with going to the South Pacific, India has historically been a negligible player there. It has been out of its strategic horizon. But in the 2014, after the Prime Minister Modi's visit, I mean, there has been the first in the Pacific Islands and the Indian Forum. And they have been in 2015, it has actually followed, and there has been a third iteration recently. And the majority of the focus has been on the climate change and building resilient infrastructure. And India also recognized the Pacific Island Forum's Board Declaration in 2018, which makes climate change as one of the major climate security threats which the South Pacific countries face. Even with Southeast Asian nations, capacity building programs have been the most preferred and visible form of maritime interactions with the region countries. We could see the Samudra Shakti, Samudra Lakshman, and with the maritime exercise with the Singapore. India has an extensive and institutional exercises with these countries. However, with countries like Philippines, Cambodia, Brunei, and Timor-Leste, relations are still in infancy. Maybe one of the reasons could be the weak naval capacity of these nations. Coming to the India's maritime capacity building with the East African states, compared to the Eastern Indian Ocean, India's maritime interactions with the East African states have been minimal. The weak naval capacities and capabilities inhibit any meaningful collaboration, but the East African states recognize and reiterate the role of India in the maritime security. Like the observed state in the Djibouti Code of Conduct Plus, which actually looks into the capacity building programs in the Western Indian Ocean. The Indian Navy also carries the mission-based deployments in the region. India also provided the coastal security for the African Union Summit and the World Forum Economic Summit in 2004-2005. So with Madagascar, with states like Madagascar, there has been a listening state bit which has been established, and the joint exercises have been modest given the low technicality and the exercises which have been part of it. Which we can see that there's the only institutional level exercise is the trilateral arrangement between the South Africa and Brazil. So with Seychelles and Mauritius, India's plans to upgrade its, as a comprehensive maritime security arrangements and capacity building. India actually gifts the patrol vessels, drone aircrafts, which actually assist in patrol and security of its vast exclusive economic zone. India has also agreed to develop the Aglega Island for naval surveillance and maritime patrols. So some of the observations which I would be looking at, did India truly develop an Indo-Pacific approach in its maritime interactions? The interactions in the East Asia and the Pacific and with the Southeast Asian nations, actually India is trying to become a true Indo-Pacific maritime role in the region. And coming back to talk about, the capability building versus capacity building versus the capability enhancement. Rather than capacity building, more focus of India has been on the capability enhancement, like joint exercises, training, and information and intelligence sharing. And there has been a lack of capacity building in maritime law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies. Navy's primary duties is warfighting, developing warfighting capabilities. But we do have the maritime law enforcement agencies like the Coast Guard and other maritime security agencies where the capacity building is still lacking. Among the Indo-Pacific countries, India's Coast Guard exercises and Coast Guard MOUs with just 8 countries. Also, the coastal and island countries in the immediate neighborhood and in the Western Indian Ocean still dominate the Indian Ocean capacity building activities. And somehow the idea of an holistic maritime security has largely been rhetoric. Previously focus has largely been on drug trafficking, piracy, and maritime terrorism. And though we have institutionalized mechanisms to cooperate on this non-traditional security threats, somehow those have not comprehensively evolved into intergovernmental mechanisms. So there is a need for the global South countries to legitimize their experiences and expertises, and not to be imposed with the Western or the global power ideas or norms or interest on them. And also there has been considerable challenges in institutions like ICWA and Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Like there has been a funding issues, and also the symposium doesn't actually take into account of the geopolitical issues in the region. Also, there has been, need to ask if rule-based order or the international law actually benefits the global South countries. Rule-based order, though it has been in discussion, though it in the discourse, it is very vaguely defined. I mean, a group of democracy countries who doesn't really adhere to the few of the international orders promote a rule-based order. But do the global south countries really benefit from having to stick to the international law? And we have seen how the Horn of Africa has actually has been militarized due to the piracy issue, and there could be strategic consequences in failing to address non-traditional security threats. I'd like to conclude by asking one question, like, I mean, is the non-traditional security stands as being poorly defined? I mean, do we need to really address it as non-traditional security threat, or just we could address it as a traditional security threat to the nations? Thank you.
All four very good thought-provoking presentations. I'm sure the discussant must have something to say. So first we'll come to the discussion and then we can take questions. Who all are the discussants? You are the one. Yeah, please.
Congratulations to all
Please
the
be brief.
yeah, to all the speakers. My first point is for Purnima about technology diplomacy. So I think you missed one of the key points, that there's competition between India and China, especially in the global south, for enhancing their ties based on by leveraging their technological advancements and by providing technological infrastructure or improving their capabilities. But the difference I see in their approaches is with respect to China, it's mostly economic. They try to integrate it into their economic model, let's say by building the infrastructure, taking advantage of it. So it's much more beneficial for the Chinese side maybe, and it's a prospective idea for the target states, the smaller states in the south, global south. But on the other hand, Indian side tries to focus also on mutual benefit, but especially capacity building such as training and human resource development. So how do you see that thing affecting India's technological diplomacy, especially with respect to China? And there's a key point that when India, I think if I'm not wrong, was trying to provide technology fund to ASEAN, there were no takers for that fund because I don't know, maybe because of Chinese competition in that area or the presence of many MNCs from Chinese side. Next argument is with respect to Prashant's presentation. I really liked his presentation, so I would like to underline that the talk about global south is because there is a rising power and capabilities of the global south countries, and relatively there has been a decline of the relative power of the Western countries, the major industrialized countries. So also in this context, there is no common idea which binds all the countries in the global south. It's not a very cohesive idea. So it's important to understand that at what level are the ideational factor is playing a key role in this. So what is the difference between India's perception of or what is the role of India's engagement with the global south in shaping or in forming a cohesive identity of the global south? And how does it contrast with that of China's approach towards the global south? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So first of all, I would like to congratulate all the panelists for such an interesting presentations about India's solidarity, and because ultimately India, because of its size and economy and its diverse culture, we will ultimately have to take an enhanced role in representing the various interests of the global south. So I have two questions, one for Purnima and one for Shayantan. So Purnima, this is sort of like related to technology diplomacy, but slightly out of the presentation that you did. But I just want to know your views or like whatever your research has said. So if you would know, like, specifically in the realm of technology, there's always this hotly contested idea of intellectual property. And there is an entire, legal framework which also has its own politics running around it, right? For example, if we all know, right, there was this specific news article where someone in the US tried to patent, basmati rice. So just an example. So given like India, of course, would like to have a of a framework around intellectual property, which would be open. But at the same time, I think it also leads to these, instances where due credit to a certain global South country, could be India, could be Sri Lanka or anyway. There could be a situation where, where the global North might, appropriate their developments, whether it's, technological or any sort, and then, subsequently those developments could, be gate kept and paywalled. So I was just curious as to how can India, contribute to this, to these politics to make sure, that the technological diplomacy, because ultimately I think knowledge sharing is important for, the benefit of mankind in general. So I was just curious about your views and what your research says on that matter. To Shanta, I think you covered almost every topic about IORA. I was just curious as to what exactly is IORA, what does it say on climate change? Because you have mentioned all the topics in general, but I think contextual developments, like climate change, or could be, anything perhaps future, we could be looking at, like refugee issues in the future because of climate change, etc. So I was just wondering where exactly does IORA talk about that? Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes. Yeah.
I'm from Central University of South Bihar. My name is Dharmendra Kumar. My question is how India can stay away from China's Thucydides trap, because China's aggressiveness not only can be seen in the border area, but also can be seen in ocean. So if we look in the history, मतलब कि मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि जैसे 1941 के वॉर के टाइम इंडिया को सपोर्ट किया रसिया ने. अभी चूँकि जो ग्लोबल ऑर्डर है उसमें इंडिया मोस्टली नॉन अलाइन मतलब अप्रोच है अभी, तो उसके अकॉर्डिंग वी आर नॉट मच क्लोजर टू यूएस एंड रसिया. बट इफ चाइना एंड रसिया comes together, how prevent our maritime zone from Chinese aggression? And second is China is more aggressive in Indian Ocean, not only in terms of security, but China is also engaging in geo-economic platform. So even मतलब मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि चाइनीज एंगेजमेंट के बावजूद भी मतलब एक जो है सस्पिशन है चाइनीज बिहेवियर टुवर्ड्स दिस कंट्री. So this suspicion creates a gap. So how can India can fulfill this gap in this Indian Ocean region?
Thank you. Yeah, you.
Hi, thank you. I just have one question for Prashant. You pointed out the dissimilarities between Indian approach to global South and the Chinese approach, and in the sense that India has a few advantages in the perceptions. I want to also sort of build upon that while that is there, one of the biggest thing that China gets on the table is the economic heft and the alternative that it provides to the global investing or global support finances like IMF and World Bank, the kind of conditions they have, and the reason why the global South countries want to take money from China despite having the apprehension about the debt. So India also in past tried to sort of balance that. We had some Asia-Africa growth corridor, but somehow it got shelved. Now there is a new grouping that is coming up, which we just saw in G20, the Middle East, India, Europe corridor. In terms of how firstly, do you think that this could be an effective way to sort of counter the Chinese economic heft? And if not, then how do you think that despite these advantages, will India still be a perceived leader? Thank you.
The second last and the last.
Thank you, everyone. I have two questions actually. First question is for Purnima ma'am about technological diplomacy. regarding technological diplomacy, India is developed for developing countries or third world countries or South. But we are not developed for developed countries. We are still developing countries. So we don't have that much technology which we can share. We have technology in space. We have technology like generic medicine. Still we have taken from that. And India share doesn't means we don't have that much to share with these developing countries. We send technicians, we can't send technology actually. So for me, like in diplomacy, what we can share them for global South. If we are sharing what developed countries had made, that will be like of what he told, that we can got into legal actions. Another area for everyone is we are young scholars and we are talking about polls. So there is also an academic poll which gives us power to define what terms and what terminology we can use. For example, still today we are using terminology like Middle East, which is West Asia actually for us. We are also using other terminologies. So as a young scholar, I want to know from everyone and from especially how we can change this narrative. And we can bring that poll which is at LSE or which is at Oxford or Western academia is controlling that, and we can bring that poll to India, ICWA and every Indian institutions actually. Thank you.
Yeah, the last.
So I have one question for Prashant. You have mentioned about Global South, and as the term was first used in 1969 at the peak of Vietnam War, and now we are seeing again the term is being used. So do you think that being, given the large geographical construct, there is a cohesiveness which exists among all the members of Global South? And my second question is both to Shantan and Kiran. You both have spoken about IORA. Do you think there is a possibility of IORA collaborating with Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative and ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific Forum? The forum was first held during this 42nd ASEAN Summit recently in September. Thank you.
Thank you. My request is please be brief, and if you have more to say, there is a lunch. You can exceed the discussion there. Shall I start? Yeah, please.
So the first question was about India's role and China's approach, right? Of course, as I already mentioned, Global South is more about the feeling actually, identifying with the same kind of problems and challenges which are there. Of course, the terminology, if we talk about, of course, the third world was there, right? The term third world, then of course the Global South. So it is not so much about the term, but it is more about the problems and the challenges which these countries have been facing, be it the underdeveloped or the least developed or among those, right? India has been there like sixth in the 1940s, late 1940s, but still not in the League of Developed Nations. So that is one thing actually which goes, that it is more with the identification of the problems and the challenges which are common across these countries, which provide them a cohesiveness, which is perhaps not geographical, but otherwise it is definitely there. So China, as far as that's identifying or accepting that terminology is concerned, or identifying itself as a member of Global South, China has been more of an advocate of the term the third world actually. But of course, recent writings which are there, more so when the US is trying its best to take away the developing country status from China, it has a lot of implications in WTO because of the differential and preferential treatment which developing countries get. So the US attempts to take away that status from China. China's growing economic heft is one of the reasons behind that. So, when the Indian leadership goes out and the Indian leadership tells Russia that this is not the era of war, and then the leadership also sitting in Europe tells Europe that Europe would have to get out of the mindset that the world's problems are not Europe's problems, but the Europe's problems are the world problems. That's the typical Eurocentrism, which has been the characteristic of Western thinking. That is something which enhances the acceptability of India as the voice of Global South. When India talks about that the challenges and the problems, the post-pandemic recovery, the human index, the human development index, these are the key challenges, core problems which need solution, not bipolar or like a Ukraine invasion. It is more of the access to grain which the Ukraine is producing, the access to Russian energy which is there, which is the requirement of the Global South. So I think that is where it comes, like acceptance and the term, of course. As far as the economic heft is concerned, you're absolutely correct. As I showed in the diagram, we are 3 trillion, they are 19 trillion. We don't have those means actually. But as C. Raja Mohan, Dr. Raja Mohan also talked about in the morning actually, but what do you do with that kind of money? Do you invest that kind of money in some projects which would actually change the life of people, or you are going to pump up that money in constructing a high-speed railway in which nobody is going to travel at the end of the day? So, of course, the devil lies in the details. We can talk a lot of things, but like India can talk a lot of things. It can propose a lot of ideas, a lot of initiatives and programs and whatnot. Like the list could be very long, but at the end of the day, how much could we implement? How much could we realize? That is one thing. Capacity building is another. Afghanistan is a good example. India has been quite selective in choosing the projects and constructing them, but they have been very key projects and which have actually changed the life of Afghanis during last 20 odd years during this time. So that is one way of looking at it. Thank you.
To the question if ICWA could actually contribute to the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative and the ASEAN outlook of the Indo-Pacific, like many sectors and preferences have overlap between ICWA and the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, like the blue economy and disaster responses, humanitarian relief, and the trade to an extent. But it is important to realize that capacity building is the only sector which doesn't have a lead country in Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative. So coming back to your question, if ICWA could actually do something, so we can have a revolving chair for capacity building nations. Maybe one of the reasons why the capacity building sector has no lead country, because capacity building involves significant resources and finance to that sector. So we could have a revolving chair, to the navies in ICWA which have significant capabilities. And to the question to the ASEAN outlook of the Indo-Pacific, if ICWA could contribute, India, ASEAN outlook, the central point is, the nations subscribe to the ASEAN centrality. The non-traditional security threats actually, we use ASEAN institutions to address the non-traditional security threats and the issues in the region. So in the sense, it plays, to what preferences state take, to the ASEAN centrality or to the ICWA, which I think is a non-negotiable for the ASEAN states. So yes.
Thank you for the question. So on the first question of ICWA and climate change, I think, there is no doubt that climate change, of course, is a very important sort of challenge for the working of ICWA. So I was just looking at the 6 priority areas of ICWA: maritime safety and security, trade, investment, fisheries management, academic science and technology, disaster management, tourism and cultural exchanges. So you see that climate change pretty much overlaps with all the priority areas. So therefore, no doubt it is very important. And again, I think here the element of double burden of Indian Ocean littoral global south also plays a very important role. So what happens to countries such as Maldives, for example, Mauritius, for example, you have pollution induced by plastic dump, you have rising sea levels. So I think all of these issues are sort of contributing to the way in which we need to look at how these maritime global south states perceive or look at climate change. So that is one. The second question was on how can India fulfill the gap or the void created by China. I think actually it's a very complex question. people are still writing on it, and there are various ways to interpret this question and to answer it. But I think one thing that comes to my mind, especially in context of the presentation that I made, is the strategic posturing by India of sort of excluding or sort of having this, exclusive element of identity attached with IORA. So if the countries which are not members of IORA, they do not possess the Indian Ocean identity as such. So therefore, this feeling of a sense of collective cooperation that can come only from people who have shared spaces, shared geopolitical spaces. I think that is one way in which, at least in terms of posturing, India can to some extent fulfill the gap created by China. And the third was on IORA working with Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative and ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook. I think we have to understand that IORA is an intergovernmental organization, and any sort of policy making that happens within IORA is done by consensus. So therefore, I think we need to keep in mind that a lot of these countries have different sort of strategic view of how they look at the Indo-Pacific. So, for example, I can think of Bangladesh right now, which very recently came out with its Indo-Pacific Outlook, and also incidentally, IORA's Indo-Pacific Outlook came out in Bangladesh Council of Ministers meeting. I think for a country like Bangladesh, they would be very wary of sort of, bandwagoning with IPOI, for example, because it is done by India, because they are taking a cautious sort of equidistant approach from China and India. So I think these are some issues that will determine whether or not IORA and IPOI can work together, or even ASEAN for that matter. Thank you.
Your first question on how India sees the China factor in its diplomacy. Firstly, I don't think India should be worried about it much, because much of Global South has now realized what collaborating with China would eventually lead to, if not now, but in terms of debt trap and all those things. India has some advantages over China, and very effective advantages in terms of how India is able to relate to such countries, how India is being part of those countries and not as a savior that comes and saves these countries, right? And also more than capacity building, which China restricts itself to, I think India goes a step ahead to do capability building, helping the society help itself to build itself, right? In absence of India, for it to be capable of building itself. So in such terms, I think India has a sure shot advantage when compared to China. Like I said, there are some domestic challenges, economy-wise and everything, but still, I think India has been going straight. Even in the case of Maldives, right now, whatever is coming up, how the new head is threatening India's, presence in Maldives to remove India's presence there. But let's say in the touch wood, but whenever a disaster, something or the other happens, who do you think is going to go first there? In such terms, I think India has made an impression of being that responsible and benevolent power when compared to China, and that itself gives it a good edge over China. Thank you. And your question on IP. Firstly, India has been, proposing initiatives to reform the IP rules and laws in several multilateral forums like WIPO or WTO, etc. But in India's technology diplomacy has never been about taking some other country's technology and then, propagating it or sharing it with another country. India has been very clear about using just open source solutions or indigenous technology. We have been creating our own technology, and I think we have come to a particular extent where we are able to share it, and India draws its lines there, and it restricts itself to that. So I think and your thing on how much India can give, again to that, I think it's unfair to say that India has not much to give to at least those countries of the Global South, because whatever we have, some of those countries do not even have the basic things. And India's technology diplomacy has more so been in terms of infrastructure development and some basic things, skills and entrepreneurial self-reliance things that India has imbibed over the years. I mean, we have survived sanctions all by ourselves, and I think we are a pro at self-reliance right now. So to an extent where we put into such sort of eventualities, I'll say take in terms of ISRO and DRDO. I'm not talking about the military aspect, but they have developed a lot of non-military technology, say agriculture-wise or even IT, cybersecurity-wise. And these are the things that India is ready to share and ready to help the other countries to imbibe such technologies so that they can proceed.
Thank you very much. I would like to say something.
I just want to thank all of you for the very in-depth presentations that you made in each one of them, whether it was on technology diplomacy, comparing China and India, IORA and maritime diplomacy. It was all, it all came in with a lot of depth. I just wanted to mention one thing. It is that, you know, India's approach towards working with other countries. When the developed countries work, it's a donor-recipient country relationship. But when India works, we come as a development partner. So in other words, we engage with countries, with whoever we are working, whether it's in capacity building or whether it is in any other supportive project. It is a development partner working in accordance with the priority of the country you're working with. So it's that country driven, not India driven. So that is one unique feature of India's approach when it works with its partners. You mentioned Afghanistan. I worked in Afghanistan. I was very much there. And I do know that dollar for a dollar, India's $1 went far beyond than a dollar of any other country. And the kind of impact India made in Afghanistan is still something which is, I'm glad you recognize it. So broadly, this is it, that we are a development partner when working with other countries. And on the maritime, you have some, you know, in IORA, you have Dr. Nivedita Ray. She just come back after a meeting. So over lunch, I'm sure all of you can have a good discussion. Thank you so much, Professor Tripathi.
Yeah, thank you. Just before concluding, I have a couple of remarks, and not anything related to the presentation in general, but because somebody mentioned you mentioned about the publication plan. I think three things will be very, very important, and I would like to see very good papers in this edited volume. First is how are we going to define Global South? I think there are three clear perspectives right now evolving on this concept. One, definitely from Indian side, there's a Chinese understanding of the Global South, and there's also the Western understanding of the Global South. I think that somehow need a little bit of reflection in the introduction itself, and that will strengthen, you know, the idea, the entire objective of this conference. I think the second, and this is to all the young scholars, about conceptualization. You know, when your paper were empirically so strong. In fact, if I would have been at your age, I don't know whether I would have presented such an empirically strong paper. But conceptually also, like the idea of Global South, maritime, diplomacy, you know, all these are concepts. It's also require a little bit of attention from your side. And that's also very important when somebody said, why only Oxford, London School of Economics, why not we, where are we? I think that's also because what Professor Raja Mohan was saying in the morning, he was my senior, but even when I was in my PhD, you know, IR as a subject was not given so much of priority. You know, it was not being regarded, and somewhere down the line, the Stanley Hoffman's, statement about IR as an American social science somehow has taken a very, a deep impact on IR scholarship. But if you look at recently, there are attempts to conceptualize, like I would say this idea of world as a one family. This is also a concept, look at the international order in a different way. Don't look at merely from the political perspective. It has a conceptual theoretical understanding. Also about the Gandhian idea of the international system, the idea of climate change, the idea of inequality. Gandhi has also discussed like the greed, human greed. He has also discussed about imperialism. So we discuss imperialism mostly from the Marxist perspective, but Gandhi was also talking in terms of imperialism from a very, very different perspective. So I think there are very strong, ideas present in the Indian traditional thoughts. Recently, Amitabh Mattu has came up with a book on taking a lot of things from Mahabharata. So I think there are attempts, and we need more such conferences, and I think ICWA has to play that role by bringing scholars, young scholars, and encourage them, promote them to conceptualize some of these things. This is very important. This is the way out. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Chair, and our speakers for an insightful sessions. I do understand there are unasked questions and unanswered questions which can be discussed over lunch. We will now quickly distribute our certificates of participants to our scholars. May I request Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, DG ICWA, to kindly hand over the certificates. As I call your name, could you kindly step forward and receive the certificate from DG? I call on Ms. Chongpi Haup to come forward. She is a student who is pursuing her PhD at the Department of Political Science, NEHU. Her areas of interest include India's foreign policy, identity, and state politics in Northeast India and border communities. Next, I would call on Ms. B. Purnima, a research scholar at the Department of Political Science, Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal University. Her research interests include India's foreign policy and national security. Next, I call Mr. Shivam Kumar Pandey. He's pursuing his PhD in Coastal and Maritime Security at the Rashtriya Raksha University and has written papers for peer-reviewed international journals. I call Mr. Shubham Singh Charak, who is pursuing his PhD in the Department of National Security Studies, Central University of Jammu, and has an interest in maritime security. I call Mr. Saurav Kumar, who is currently pursuing his doctoral research at the Department of Political Science, Punjab University, and his interest areas are India's soft power in Africa. May I call Mr. Sayantan Haldar, who is a doctoral candidate at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University, and his research dwells on India's evolving maritime security. May I call Mr. Prashant Kaushik from the Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. He has written several book chapters and his research has appeared in a number of journals. May I call Mr. Kiran GSK, who is a fourth-year doctoral student at the Department of Humanities and Social Science at IIT Guwahati and looks at maritime security, maritime capabilities, etc. May I call Ms. Shruti De to come forward. She is a student of International Relations at Pondicherry University and focuses on Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the emerging dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. I call Mr. Praveen Kumar Yadav, a research scholar from the Department of Political Science from Central University of Himachal Pradesh, who looks at international political economy, India's foreign policy, and India's engagement in South Asia. I call Mr. Prakash Singh, a scholar from the Center for Development Studies, University of Allahabad, who is pursuing his research on exploring urbanization, ecological impacts on Indo-Gangetic plains. I call Mr. Dharmendra Kumar from the Department of Political Science at the Central University of South Bihar, who is working on India-China relations, Africa, Indian Ocean geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geostrategy. I call Mr. Prakash Kundrakapams, sorry for mistake, from Guwahati University. He's a political theorist by training with deeper interest in international relations, India's foreign policy, and his doctoral thesis deals with Gandhian theory of justice. I call Mr. Samir Harshad Pandey, who's pursuing his PhD from the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Dr. Hari Singh Gauri, Central University, Sagar. He has published a number of research papers in journals and has written a book chapter. I call Mr. Hari Shankar Ji, who's pursuing his PhD from the Department of International Relations from Central University of Kerala and looks at his interest in multilateralism and international cooperation. I call Mr. Akshay Pandey, who's currently working on his PhD on dynamics of coalition government and making of security policy in Asia, in India, and a study from 1998 to 2014. Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, we come to an end of our conference. On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Archana Negi and Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi for chairing our two sessions. I thank Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, DG ICWA, Ms. Nutan Kapoor Mahavar, JS ICWA, and Dr. Nivedita Ray, Director Research, and other staff members and colleagues from ICWA for their support. Last but not the least, I thank all our participants who have traveled from all across India to take part in this conference and the members of their audience. I would like to repeat that we are once calling on our participating scholars to send us their papers. We will share the guidelines and look forward to your chapter for our publication. We also call on our discussants, participants to also contribute. If you would like to contribute, you can mail us the topic of your choice at icwaysc@gmail.com. With this, we bring this conference to an end. Thank you so much. Please join us for lunch.
Congratulations.